And so I'm trying to get into the habit of just doing that now, where I just sort of record these conversations. So the question, just so that everyone in the um, recording can know. Uh, so, in your opinion, Jesus reformed the Jewish faith and created an avenue through which one can become a chosen person through good practice. But this didn't actually change the specific nature of the Jewish faith. That is correct. Yeah, I I don't accept the notion that Christianity in any way it can possibly replace Judaism, and there are a number of nuanced reasons for that. The primary reason has to be with who Jesus is. Like, forget the nuanced differences between uh, the theologies of Judaism and Christianity, etc., etc. Yeshua, Jesus, at his
You.
fundamental core, is the Messiah of the Jewish people. He is the prophesized Moshiach figure from Judaism. If anything Yeshua does, right, from the context of Judaism alone coming forward, because you know, it's not like Christianity existed before Yeshua arrived.
Right.
If he does anything that is fundamentally against Judaism, then his candidacy for Mashiach doesn't work. So Christianity in on itself, if it does anything to contradict Judaism, like I said, it doesn't gel with what Yeshua would have needed to be in order to be Mashiach in on itself. So it's, to me, it seems to be a logical contradiction to treat Jesus as a separate person altogether from the Jewish faith of which his ministry and status of Mashiach is contextualized.
I feel like some people would argue this is not necessarily my view, but I think some would argue that Jesus' status as Son of God supersedes his status as a Jew.
Um, that that Jesus' status as the Son of God precedes him as being a Jew.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if him being the Son of God is actually all that relevant. Like, what would be the relevancy of that? Because in order to be Mashiach, like, nowhere in the messianic prophecies does it say that you have to be the Son of God in order to be Messiah. Like, that,
Right. But
like
but we
it
know
just turns.
Jesus is the Son of God, right?
Right. We know that he's the Son of God. What I'm saying is that that is part of how the plan got executed, but that's not part of the requirements. So,
Right. And sorry, go on.
like him being the Son of God is important for other reasons. I would say that it doesn't really precede him being Jewish, because, like, if let's just say out of nowhere, a Roman citizen who wasn't Jewish was the Son of God, he's not of the line of David, so he can't be Mashiach. It wouldn't matter.
Right. What I mean is that I think certain people would argue against you saying that, well, it is true that that Jesus does fulfill the role of Mashiach in the Jewish faith. They'd argue that his position as the Son of God and Redeemer of men precedes in importance that of him being the Mashiach of the Jewish faith, at least in their opinion.
Yeah, and I would say that cannot be true. His status of Mashiach is contingent on his status within the Jewish people. I mean, obviously not whether or not they accept him, because we all know that they didn't. But that him being that Mashiach in on itself, it like him being part of the Jewish people, that's a literal requirement.
Right. What I mean is that I want to be explaining it like very well. What I mean is that a Christian might look at it and say, "You're right that like him being a Jew is a requirement for him being Mashiach, and that's like very important."
Right.
But they would argue that it's much more important to them that like the fact that Jesus is the Son of God and the Redeemer of men kind of supersedes his role as Mashiach in the first place. And they would say that it is true that he is the Mashiach of the Jewish people, but it is more important to the person speaking that he is the Son of God, I guess. And so therefore, they can take their faith and separate it from the Jewish one.
Uh, you know, it's funny because Judaism maintains that non-Jews don't actually need to be Jewish. So, to some degree, that's actually true. You know, there is this sort of like 6-9 view position where, like, you know, dependent as to where you're standing, Yeshua's Jewishness is of some level of relevancy. I think that's actually true. Yeah, I might have not been understanding you.
Yeah. So going off of your position that Jesus is the Meshua, and that's like
Well, so
you can't separate him from Judaism. Where would you
Mashiach.
disagree? Where does this lead you to disagree with people? Like what places does it make you like differ from people who would say no, the Christians gain a like the Christian faith is therefore separate to degree from like Christian from Judaism.
So it's
Like
not
where would this cause
separate.
you to differ?
It's not separate in ethics. It's definitely not separate in ethics. I mean, like, you know,
That's true.
Christians might say that they don't practice the law, but in reality, they definitely hold to it from a spirit of the law standpoint. You know, uh, every time I talk to a Christian who's like, the Mosaic law no longer applies, I'm like, all right, so then murder's okay, right? But the only grounding you have that murder is wrong would be the Ten Commandments, where it says thou shalt not kill. So in terms of ethics, Judaism and Christianity are not separate entities in the slightest. In terms of chronology, they're not separate entities in the slightest. If they were, Christianity wouldn't be using the Jewish Tanakh as the quote Old Testament. And the very oldest of the events that even led into the creation of Christianity would have never have happened had it not been for the existence of Judaism as a religion. There are countless examples of Mishnaic practice in the New Testament. And so anybody who's educated on Judaism can see the DNA of Judaism in the New Testament. And like you know, your average Christian might not see it there, and that's perfectly fine. I wouldn't expect your average non-Jew to be like, oh yes, this is a reference to that Jewish thing. But they are there, and that in on itself means that Christianity is not separate from Judaism in any way that could be seen as measurable, in my opinion. That, like, you know, the Christian faith is contingent on the Jewish faith. Does that make sense?
I get what you mean, but I think the two things that someone disagree with you on are one is that um, about the part about the law. I don't think you can argue that Christians follow like the Jewish law to the letter, for instance. Like that does not happen.
No, well, no one does. Not even modern Jews do. Like, you know, every time I run into a Jew who's like full, like, you know, Torah, I'm like, well, how many goats have you sacrificed as of late? The answer's always 0. No one follows the law to every crossed T and dotted I. It's impossible to do.
Right.
What happens is there are laws that are acceptable, laws that can actually be done, and there are some laws that are impossible, and there are some laws that require what we call halacha, which is like community standards. And I would argue that Christians have their own halacha, Jews have their own halacha, there are other groups that have their own halacha.
How do you spell halahad, by the way? How do you spell that?
Halacha, give me a second. Now, most halacha, I just put it in your DMs,
Yeah, I see.
is in reference to the Jewish Mishnah Torah and the 2 books written on what the 613 commandments actually are. which ironically those two books don't agree as to what the 613 are. But, like, fundamentally speaking, the community standards, say, found in Catholicism, for all of its faults, I think constitutes a form of Gentile halacha. And so again, no one follows the Torah to every cross T and dotted I. No one in today's world does that. What they do is they follow the spirit of the law. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not murder, honor your mother and father, etc., etc. The other things that are vague, need filling in, you follow your group halacha. But that in on itself is, again, that's a Jewish thing to do. It's something that Christianity followed into the footsteps of. So even in modern Christian faith, you can see the DNA of Judaism within its practice, even if people don't notice it being there.
So would it be something like the Ten Commandments are like the analogize it to U.S. law? The Ten Commandments are the Constitution, and each like offshoot is like a state who has their own law that you have to follow. Is it kind of like that, or is that not a good analogy at all?
Uh, I, I don't know if there's a good analogy, but as far as analogies go, I would say that that's an all right analogy.
All right.
I could probably come up with a better one if I weren't on a timer, which, by the way, my time's up.
Oh
Uh,
shit.
but yeah, it kind of like that. Different communities go off in different ways, and they sort of come up with their own interpretations of what the core of the law actually means.
Right. What I
So,
feel like the sorry, I know we're out of time, but the trouble with that wouldn't someone argue that there's like a trouble with that where if like you can just follow the spirit of the law, then couldn't someone just go like, well, that just means the law doesn't mean anything, like pretty much. If you can just like interpret it to be what you want, like isn't there a problem with that?
is there a problem with that? Well, for some things, there kind of isn't any room for argument. Like, thou shalt not kill means thou shalt not kill. You can't, like, twist that around and be like, oh, well, the spirit of the law means that I should be able to kill. Like, you're just blatantly lying at that point.
So does this include stuff like capital punishment or like self defense is not included in thou should not kill, right?
Self-defense is not included. Capital punishment is not included. War is not included in killing, actually. Like, if you're in a country and you go to war and you kill someone, you're not liable under that law. Mostly because the person you're killing likely has intent on killing you. So, uh,
Like, where's the part in the Old Testament where it says that exception about self defense? I can't remember which part it was. Fuck.
uh, I'll get it for you later, and I'll put it in the description of the video for everyone else to see. It is there. It's like it's part of the Torah where they're talking about, like, if someone breaks into your house and you can't get to a constable, you can kill them. Like that's in the Torah. Which is funny because
Right.
that means that the Torah is technically in favor of the castle laws that we have here in Connecticut.
Pretty funny. Last thing, and we'll leave. Last thing, it's that I understand what you mean by when you talk about how Christianity is sort of the history of Christianity and the law of Christianity is sort of intertwined with the ideas of Judaism. But I feel like what someone who's a Christian would argue is that they may recognize that it is in fact descended from Judaism, but they would say that they don't recognize Judaism itself. Like they would say that while we are an evolution and a result of Judaism, it does not mean that I have to respect Judaism in and of itself, even if there are parts that led to Christianity, I guess.
Well, I would sincerely question as to, well, A, what value does this person's respect have? You know, that's a little presumptuous. And I'm not saying that you're saying that, but, like, anyone who would say that, that's kind of presumptuous that Judaism would need said person's respect.
I don't
My
mean like respect as in like I respect you or I don't respect you. It's more like they whether or not they agree that Judaism has any claim towards like reality, I guess. Because in the end, religion is a claim about reality and how it works.
well, then I would argue that if that were true, get rid of the entire Old Testament and only read the New Testament. And if you do that, I promise you, none of it's going to make any sense. If you're seriously going to not respect the Jewish influence of Christianity, then you might as well do yourself the favor and completely cut it off entirely. And that means getting rid of the Old Testament. And just about everything in the New Testament does not make sense without the Old Testament.
Right.
So I would say that if that's what they're talking about, then they've essentially invoked what amounts to a fool's theology.